Hello everyone, this is Taryn with Wonderfully Made Handcrafting, and I'm back to Theology Thursday. Now, this week we're talking about question 19 of the Westminster Shorter Catechism, and question 19 asks, "What is the misery of that estate whereinto men fell?" And the answer is, all mankind, by their fall, lost communion with God, are under his wrath and curse, and so made liable to all the miseries in this life, to death itself, and to the pains of hell forever. And we have a number of Bible verses that back this up in this book that I'm going through. This is the book, The Westminster Shorter Catechism for Study Classes by G.I. Williamson. And he puts different verses down to support that answer of the Westminster Shorter Catechism. One being Genesis 3:8, which says, Adam and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God. Then we have Ephesians 2:3, and were by nature the children of wrath. Galatians 3:10, cursed is everyone that continueth not in all things which are written in the book of the law to do them. Lamentations 3:39, wherefore doth a living man complain, a man for the punishment of his sins? Romans 6:23, for the wages of sin is death. And also Matthew 25:41, then shall he also say unto them on the left hand, depart from me, ye cursed, into everlasting fire prepared for the devil and his angels. So question 19 is fairly simple to understand, and it's basically talking about what's fallen man's misery. What does that mean? And so we look at the answer and we see that we're under God's wrath and curse when we have lost communion with God. We've also have misery in this life that we cannot entirely escape. And that includes death and the pain of hell forever for those who are unsaved. Our life on this world is taught in the Bible as something that's very short, a shadow, a dream, a watch in the night, and that is just a blink, and then we think of eternity and those who are going to suffer in hell forever. I know we'll talk about hell in questions to come, but we have a couple verses here. Matthew 3:12 talks about it as an unquenchable fire. Mark 9:48 says the worm that dieth not and the fire that is not quenched. We also talk about fire and brimstone in Revelation 14:10, and the outer darkness and the weeping and gnashing of teeth in Matthew 8:12. So obviously, that is something that the saved don't have to experience. And this is where we differ once we're saved from fallen man. Williamson points out a number of things that are different as being God's children. One being that we enjoy communion with God once again. Through the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, we can have communion with God. We no longer have to fear death. We don't have to endure his everlasting punishment. Although we do still are still chastised and still punished by God, that is in love, as we read in Hebrews 12:6. For whom the Lord loveth, he chasteneth and scourgeth every son whom he receiveth. Williamson writes, so in the life of the believer too, there comes sickness and sorrow, etc. But the difference is that it no longer comes as an expression of the wrath and curse of God, but as a corrective discipline. As believers, there's also no sting in death. Nothing can separate us from our Father. So although question 19 is talking about the fall of man and what that means living in misery as separated from Christ, we do know that as his children, we are saved. We are saved from his wrath. We are in communion with him once again, and that we do not have to be fearful of death. So as I turn to talk about the crafty portion of this video, I am using these leaves that I created in an Instagram reel. All I did was use some gilding flakes on one of these leaf fragments dies from Holtz. And now I'm just adding some grunge around the edges. I used some of that Crypt paste and just added that into the holes and the edges of some places on the leaves. And then I am coming over and just adding a little bit of rusty Hinge and also ground espresso to that grit paste. Now with grit paste, you do want it to dry naturally. It's not good to heat set it. And so I've waited a little bit of time before adding this dye ink and Oxide. I did have a little bit extra ink on the side, so I decided to cover up the back side of the leaves simply because I knew some would be hanging off the tag. And I also added some around the edges of the tag itself just to dirty it up a little bit more. And I sprayed some water to really oxidize it and give some differentiation. I also had this hole reinforcer that I had ripped off previously. I'm coming in with some rusty Hinge, just squishing it on the pad itself, and then adding some of this clear embossing powder. Now that is just to add a little bit of a glossy finish and nice look to the top of the tag, just to kind of bring your eye up a little bit more, but it did turn out very bright compared to everything else on this tag. So I will add a little bit of frayed burlap around the edges just to make it nice and cohesive. Now I have this wonderful follower and friend, Bobby. She owns Precious Memory Boxes, and she knows how much I love vintage stuff. And so she had purchased a bunch of music rolls and sent me one, and I was so excited to use it because it has this whole fall vibe going on. It's a maple leaf rag song, and so I decided to use all the pieces that I could in this tag. There is this little leather pull tab on the bottom that I'm cutting out, and I'll use that, and also the little music name tag as well. Now to help me put this cluster together, I did decide to staple those two leaves together first before doing much of anything. And then I'm also going to be adding some foam tape to the back of the music name to kind of pop it off, but also because it's going to be a little bit wonky beneath it with that leather pull. And so that's why I decided to add that foam tape to the back. Now with this leather pull, I probably should have used Fabri-Tac glue or something a little bit tackier that dries faster, but I did use Barely Arts glue. It did work fine. However, I did also have to sit there and hold it down for quite a bit of time and add some extra glue to this one corner. But anyways, after that, it did stay well. And now we're just adding the rest of this cluster together. So I add some to the back side of these leaves, although I make sure not to put any on the side that's going to be hanging off. And then we're going to add that name, the maple leaf rag. Now, once I have this down, I decided that I needed some more texture in the background of that. So I actually grab some of my mummy cloth from Holtz. Now you could just use cheesecloth as well. I do kind of pull it apart a little bit, and I'm going to stuff that in underneath that name tag. But first off, I realized that this is too white and too clean for the cluster that I have going on. So I decided to take some of my frayed burlap ink and also a little bit of rusty Hinge that came off my hands because my hands are now very dirty, and just dirty that up a little bit so that it's not so clean but still adds that texture to the background. After tucking that in behind the cluster, I do decide that I want to add some definition around the edges of this tag. So I take my distress ink in black soot and just use that, rub it on the edges of this tag, and then I'll just kind of move it around a little bit with one of my blending foams, and that will just complete this whole tag. If you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much for watching my Theology Thursdays. If you liked anything that you've seen here, I will link everything I use down below in the description. Those are affiliate links, so thank you so much for using those, and I hope you have a wonderful day, guys. Bye.